The ancient Dragon Council chamber carved deep within Mount Paraxis had witnessed many coronations over the millennia, but never one quite like this. Scales of emerald, crimson, and obsidian shifted nervously as the assembled dragon lords watched their new sovereign take the throne. King Vorthak the Terrible, a massive black dragon whose wingspan could blot out the sun, settled his enormous bulk upon the crystal seat that had remained empty for 3 centuries. The previous king had died in the Great War against the Star Devourers, those mechanical monstrosities that swept through systems-consuming worlds. Dragons had fought alongside other species then, their ancient pride swallowed for the sake of survival. But now, with the immediate threat past, old ways were reasserting themselves. Vorthak had claimed the throne through ancient rite of combat, defeating 7 challengers in aerial duels that shook the very mountains. Yet the dragons were not pleased. Whispers echoed through the vast chamber like steam hissing from volcanic vents. Vorthak was powerful, yes, but he was also young by dragon standards, barely 800 years old. More troubling still were the rumors of his unconventional ideas. He spoke of maintaining alliances with the warm-blooded species, of shared knowledge and cooperation. Such concepts were anathema to dragons who had ruled through fear and superiority for eons. Lord Paraxis the Red, eldest of the council and master of the mountain that bore his name, rose to address the new king. His voice rumbled like an avalanche. "Your Majesty, the council recognizes your claim to the throne. However, we must discuss the future of our realm. The lesser species grow bold in these times. They forget their place beneath our claws." Vorthak's golden eyes fixed upon the ancient red dragon. Even seated, the new king's presence was overwhelming. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of millennia despite his relative youth. "The galaxy has changed, Lord Paraxis. We cannot rule as our ancestors did. The Star Devourers showed us that survival requires adaptation." A younger dragon, Lady Crystalwing of the Silver Flight, interjected with barely concealed disdain. "You speak of adaptation, yet you ignore our nature. We are dragons. We are apex predators, not partners with prey animals." The word partners dripped from her forked tongue like acid. The tension in the chamber grew thick enough to cut. Other dragon lords murmured agreement with Crystalwing's sentiment. They had accepted Vorthak as king because tradition demanded it, but their hearts remained unconvinced. Dragons were solitary by nature, coming together only for the most pressing matters. The idea of genuine cooperation, especially with species they had once considered beneath notice, felt like a betrayal of everything they were. Vorthak stood slowly, his full height impressive even among dragons. "I understand your concerns, my lords. But consider this. While we debated amongst ourselves for 3 centuries without a ruler, the humans built an empire that spans 12 systems. The Altarians developed technology that rivals our own natural abilities. The universe has not waited for us to emerge from our isolation." Lord Shadowscale, master of the Dark Nebula territories, laughed bitterly. "Humans, those short-lived, soft-skinned creatures, they may have spread like a plague across their little corner of space, but they remain nothing more than clever vermin. One dragon could reduce their finest fleet to scrap metal." "Perhaps," Vorthak replied carefully, "but vermin that learns to use tools becomes dangerous, and humans, whatever else they may be, are remarkable learners." The council erupted in outraged roars. The very suggestion that humans could pose any threat to dragonkind was deeply insulting. Dragons had existed when humanity was still discovering fire. They had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations while humans struggled to leave their birth world. The idea that these mayflies could challenge eternal dragons was laughable. But Vorthak pressed on, undeterred by their anger. "I do not suggest they are our equals, but neither are they helpless. During the war against the Star Devourers, I fought alongside human pilots. They were brave beyond their physical limitations, clever in ways that surprised me, and absolutely relentless in pursuit of victory. These are not traits to dismiss lightly." Lady Stormwing of the Northern Reaches, her blue scales crackling with electrical energy, hissed her displeasure. "You sound almost fond of them, Your Majesty. Have you forgotten that we are dragons? We do not make friends with our prey." The new king's expression darkened, his patience wearing thin. "I have forgotten nothing, Lady Stormwing. I remember that our pride and isolation left us unprepared for the Star Devourers. I remember that we nearly lost everything because we believed ourselves untouchable. I remember that cooperation, however distasteful, was what saved us all. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the distant rumble of the mountain's volcanic heart. The dragons knew he spoke truth, but truth could be as bitter as poison. They had indeed been caught unprepared by the mechanical invaders. Their ancient magic and raw power had struggled against emotionless machines that felt no fear, no pain, and no mercy. It had taken combined fleets of multiple species, sharing knowledge and tactics to finally drive the Star Devourers back into the void between galaxies. Lord Pyraxis spoke again, his tone carefully neutral. "What exactly do you propose, Your Majesty?" "That we socialize with these lesser beings." Vorthak settled back onto his throne, considering his words carefully. "I propose that we establish formal diplomatic relations with the major powers. Trade agreements. Knowledge exchanges. Perhaps even joint military exercises to prepare for future threats." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Dragons roared their outrage, some breathing fire in their fury. The very concept was so alien to their nature that many could barely comprehend it. Dragons did not negotiate, they commanded. They did not trade. They took what they desired. They certainly did not engage in joint exercises with species they could defeat with a casual swipe of their claws. As the chaos continued, Vorthak observed his subjects with growing concern. He had hoped that the war might have changed their perspectives, might have opened their minds to new possibilities. Instead, he saw the same arrogance and isolation that had nearly destroyed them. The dragons would not accept his vision willingly. They would need to be shown, perhaps through harsh experience, that the old ways no longer served their interests. But how could he make them understand when their very nature rebelled against the concept? The answer, when it came to him, would prove more dramatic than even he could have imagined. Captain Marcus Chen had seen many strange things during his 15 years serving in the Terran Defense Fleet, but a formal invitation to dine with the Dragon King was definitely a first. The holographic message had materialized on his ship's bridge 3 days ago, bearing the official seal of the Dragon Realm, and a request that seemed almost too surreal to believe. Now, as his small diplomatic shuttle approached the massive space station orbiting Draconis Prime, Marcus wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his career. The station itself was a marvel of bioengineering, grown rather than built. Living coral-like structures spiraled outward from a central hub, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of organic intelligence. Dragons preferred their technology to be alive when possible, viewing mechanical constructs as soulless and crude. As Marcus's shuttle was guided into a docking bay by invisible force fields, he could see the walls literally reshaping themselves to accommodate his vessel. King Vorthak had been surprisingly cordial in their limited communications, but Marcus knew better than to assume that meant safety. Dragons were notoriously unpredictable, and their idea of hospitality might include testing a guest's worthiness through trial by combat. Marcus had left detailed instructions with his crew regarding what to do if he didn't return within 48 hours. Hopefully, they wouldn't be needed. The docking bay sealed itself with a wet, organic sound that made Marcus's skin crawl slightly. Atmosphere flooded the chamber, and after his ship's sensors confirmed it was breathable, he stepped out onto what felt disturbingly like cartilage beneath his boots. A figure approached him from the shadows, and Marcus had to fight the urge to reach for his sidearm. It was a dragon, but in humanoid form. The ability to shapeshift was rare among dragonkind, possessed only by the most ancient and powerful of their species. This one appeared as a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and eyes that held depths of knowledge spanning centuries. Her skin had a subtle scaled texture that caught the light, and when she smiled, Marcus caught a glimpse of fangs. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords. "I am Lady Moonshadow, advisor to His Majesty. Welcome to Nexus Station. The king awaits you in the Crystal Gardens." As they walked through corridors that seemed to shift and flow around them, Marcus tried to process the implications of this meeting. Relations between dragons and humans had been formal but distant since the end of the Star Devourer War. Dragons maintained their superiority complex, treating humans as useful but ultimately inferior allies. For King Vorthak to extend a personal invitation suggested something significant was happening. The Crystal Gardens were breathtaking, a vast chamber filled with living crystal formations that sang in harmonious tones as they grew. Water flowed in impossible spirals through the air, held by gravitational manipulation fields. In the center of this alien paradise sat King Vorthak, not in his intimidating true form but in a humanoid shape that still radiated power. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that seemed to absorb light and golden eyes that held the weight of centuries. "Captain Chen." Vorthak rose and extended a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please sit. We have much to discuss." Marcus took the offered seat, noting that it adjusted itself to his body automatically. Dragon biotechnology was far more advanced than human science, though they rarely shared such innovations. "Your Majesty, I must admit, I'm curious about the purpose of this meeting. My superiors were quite surprised by your invitation." Vorthak smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. "I imagine they were. Dragons are not known for social calls. But these are unusual times, Captain. Tell me, what do you know of the current state of dragon politics?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Dragons were famously secretive about their internal affairs. "Very little, Your Majesty. We know you recently claimed the throne, but beyond that, my subjects are unhappy with me," Vorthak said bluntly. "They believe I am too progressive in my thinking. They see my willingness to work with other species as weakness, a betrayal of dragon nature. They wish to return to the old ways of isolation and supremacy." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If the Dragon King was being overthrown, it could destabilize the entire sector. "I see, and how does this concern humanity?" Vorthak leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. "Because I believe the old ways will lead to disaster. Not just for dragons, but for all species in this galaxy. The Star Devourers were defeated, but they were not destroyed. Intelligence suggests they are regrouping beyond the galactic rim. When they return, we will need unity, not division." "What do you propose?" "An exchange program. Human officers serving on dragon vessels. Dragon advisors working with human fleets. Cultural and technological sharing. Joint training exercises. The kind of integration that will make cooperation instinctive rather than forced." Marcus's mind reeled. The implications were staggering. "Your Majesty, with respect, I'm not sure my people would accept dragon authority, nor would yours accept human guidance. Which brings me to the real purpose of our meeting," Vorthak said, his expression growing serious. "I need a demonstration. Something that will prove to my subjects that humans are worthy of respect, not mere tolerance. I need someone to do the impossible, which is..." Vorthak stood and walked to the crystal formations, touching one gently. The crystal sang a different note and images formed in its depths. Marcus saw a massive red dragon, ancient and terrible, breathing fire that could melt starship hulls. "Lord Paraxis the Red, eldest of my council and my most vocal opponent. He has issued a challenge, as is his right under our laws. He claims that if any human can best him in single combat, he will support my policies of cooperation. If not, he'll work to have you removed from the throne," Marcus finished. "And you want me to fight him?" "Not fight," Vorthak corrected. "Conquer. The challenge is not to the death, but to submission. The one who yields first loses." Marcus stared at the image of the massive dragon, trying to comprehend the scale of what was being asked. Paraxis was easily 200 feet long, with claws that could shred battle armor and breath hot enough to melt tungsten. A human challenging such a being to single combat wasn't brave, it was suicidal. "Why me?" Marcus asked. "I'm a starship captain, not a warrior." "Because your record speaks of innovation under pressure. The Battle of Kepler 442, where you used solar flare interference to mask your ship's approach. The defense of New Shanghai, where you turned a mining operation into an improvised fortress. You think differently than most military officers, Captain. You see possibilities where others see only obstacles." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what was being asked. "When?" 3 days hence on Paraxis Prime. The entire Dragon Council will be watching, along with representatives from dozens of species. This will not be a private affair. "And if I refuse?" Vorthak's expression grew sad. "Then the old guard wins by default. Dragons will retreat into isolation. Other species will go their separate ways, and when the Star Devourers return, we will face them divided and weak. Billions will die because pride mattered more than survival." The weight of potential galactic catastrophe settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. He thought of his crew, of Earth, of all the worlds that would burn if another Star Devourer invasion succeeded. Then he thought of Lord Paraxis, ancient and terrible, and wondered how exactly one conquered a mountain of scales and fury. I'll need equipment, he said finally, and time to study dragon physiology. Vorthak's smile was brilliant. You accept? I accept. But Your Majesty, I should warn you. I have absolutely no idea how to beat a dragon. Then you'll have to learn quickly, Vorthak replied. The future of the galaxy may depend on it. The preparation chambers beneath Nexus Station hummed with activity as Marcus dove into the most intensive crash course of his life. Dragon physiology, psychology, combat techniques, ancient laws and customs, every piece of information that might give him even the slightest edge against Lord Paraxis. Lady Moonshadow had provided him with access to the Dragon Archives, databases that contained knowledge spanning millennia. What Marcus learned both fascinated and terrified him. Dragons were far more complex than human propaganda suggested. Yes, they were physically devastating, capable of tearing apart starships with their bare claws, but they were also creatures of deep emotion, bound by intricate codes of honor that governed every aspect of their society. Understanding these codes might be the key to survival. Dragons are not mere beasts, Lady Moonshadow explained as they reviewed combat footage from historical challenges. Every movement in battle has meaning. Every gesture carries weight. Lord Paraxis is ancient enough to remember when these rituals had religious significance. He will expect you to honor the forms, even as he tries to destroy you. Marcus watched a recording of Paraxis fighting another dragon 3 centuries ago. The red dragon moved like liquid fire, his massive form flowing through aerial maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. But there was something else, a pattern to his attacks that spoke of deep tradition rather than pure aggression. He's showing off, Marcus realized. Every flame burst, every claw strike, he's demonstrating his mastery of classical techniques. Precisely. Dragons fight not just to win, but to display their understanding of the ancient ways. It is an art form as much as combat. This gave Marcus an idea. If Paraxis was bound by tradition, then perhaps that tradition could be used against him. Dragons valued honor above victory, respect above domination. The key wasn't to defeat Paraxis through superior force. That was impossible. The key was to earn his respect through understanding. King Vorthak appeared in the training chamber, his humanoid form still radiating power. How are the preparations proceeding, Captain? I think I understand what needs to happen, Marcus replied. But I'm going to need something that doesn't exist yet. Name it. Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing a suit of armor unlike anything ever built. I need something that can interface with dragon biotechnology. Something that will let me communicate not just through words but through the energy patterns dragons use for emotional expression. Vorthak's eyes widened with understanding. You want to speak to him in our true language. More than that. I want to show him that humans can learn, can adapt, can become worthy of respect. But I'll need your best bioengineers working around the clock. The next 48 hours blurred together in a frenzy of impossible engineering. Dragon artisans worked alongside human technicians, creating something that had never existed before, a hybrid technology that bridged 2 completely different approaches to science. The armor that emerged was a work of art, sleek and organic, covered in scales that shifted color with the wearer's emotional state. Built-in neural interfaces would translate Marcus's thoughts into the complex energy patterns that formed dragon emotional communication. As the final components were installed, Marcus felt the weight of what he was attempting. He wasn't just representing humanity in this challenge. He was trying to prove that cooperation between species wasn't just possible, but beneficial. The armor would let him speak to Paraxis in ways no human had ever attempted, but it also meant opening his mind to alien influences he barely understood. The journey to Paraxis Prime took 18 hours, giving Marcus time to practice with his new equipment. The armor felt alive against his skin, responding to his thoughts and emotions with subtle shifts in color and texture. Neural feedback let him sense the ship's living systems, feeling the pulse of its organic components like a second heartbeat. Paraxis Prime was a world of volcanic fury, its surface scarred by millennia of dragon habitation. The ancient red dragon had carved his lair directly into the planet's largest volcano, creating an amphitheater where the challenge would take place. As Marcus's shuttle descended through sulfurous clouds, he could see thousands of dragons perched on rocky ledges, their eyes glowing like stars in the perpetual twilight. The shuttle landed on a platform of crystallized lava, and Marcus stepped out into air that shimmered with heat and barely contained energy. Lord Paraxis was waiting for him, and seeing the ancient dragon in person was overwhelming. The beast was massive beyond comprehension, his red scales glowing with internal fire, his eyes holding the wisdom and fury of ages. When he spoke, his voice was like the rumble of tectonic plates shifting. So the little mammal comes to face the master of flame. Tell me, soft one, do you understand what you have agreed to? Marcus activated his armor's translation systems, feeling the neural interface come alive. When he responded, his words carried undertones of respect and determination that no human voice could have produced. I understand, Lord of the Ancient Fire. I come not to conquer through strength, but to prove that wisdom and courage can bridge any divide. A ripple of surprise went through the assembled dragons. No human had ever spoken their emotional language before. Paraxis himself seemed taken aback, his massive head tilting as he studied the strange little being who had somehow learned to communicate properly. Interesting, Paraxis rumbled. You have learned some of our ways. But learning and understanding are different things, mammal. Show me what you truly comprehend. The formal challenge began with ritual declarations, each participant stating their purpose and calling upon ancient witnesses. Marcus followed the traditional forms as best he could, his armor translating his earnest respect into patterns of light and energy that spoke directly to dragon sensibilities. The crowd grew quieter, more attentive, as they realized this human had somehow managed to honor their customs properly. Then came the combat phase, and Marcus had to resist every human instinct that screamed at him to dodge and weave. Instead, he stood firm as Paraxis began his demonstration of mastery, breathing precise patterns of flame that showcased technical perfection built over millennia. Each burst of fire came closer to Marcus, testing his resolve, but the human held his ground. When it was his turn to respond, Marcus did something unprecedented. Instead of attacking, he began to dance. The armor allowed him to move in ways that mimicked dragonflight patterns, his whole body becoming a form of communication. He told the story of the Star Devourer war through movement, showing the initial pride and isolation of all species, the devastating first contact with the mechanical invaders, and finally the hard-won cooperation that led to victory. The assembled dragons watched in stunned silence as this small human somehow captured the essence of their greatest trial through pure expression. When Marcus finished, he stood before Paraxis with arms spread wide, completely vulnerable, and spoke in perfect dragon emotional syntax. I offer no contest of strength, Ancient One, for that would be folly. Instead, I offer understanding, respect, and the promise that humanity seeks not to diminish dragonkind, but to stand beside you as the galaxy faces its next great challenge. Lord Paraxis stared at him for a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The silence stretched across the volcanic amphitheater like a held breath. Thousands of dragon eyes focused on the small human standing fearlessly before their most ancient lord. Waiting for Paraxis to render judgment, Marcus could feel the weight of their attention, the barely contained power that surrounded him on all sides. His armor registered the emotional emanations from the crowd, confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. Lord Paraxis lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with Marcus, each golden orb larger than the human's entire torso. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that the armor translated as deep contemplation, mixed with something unexpected. Surprise. You speak of understanding, little one. Yet you have not faced the true test. Words are easy. Movement is art, but conquest requires something more fundamental. The ancient dragon reared back to his full height, and Marcus realized with growing dread that the formal portion of the challenge was over. Now came the part where Paraxis would actually try to defeat him. The red dragon's eyes began to glow with increasing intensity, and the temperature in the amphitheater rose dramatically as internal fires built toward release. Marcus felt his armor's cooling systems activate automatically, but he knew they wouldn't be enough to protect him from the full fury of Paraxis's flame. The dragon fire that was coming would be hot enough to vaporize starship hulls. His only hope lay in the understanding he had gained through days of intensive study. I know what you're going to do, Marcus said, his armor translating his calm confidence into patterns of blue-white light. You're going to demonstrate the 7 sacred flames, the classical sequence that proves mastery over fire itself. It's a test of my courage as much as your power. Paraxis paused, clearly not expecting this response. Around the amphitheater, Other dragons shifted restlessly. The 7 sacred flames was one of their most revered traditions, rarely performed before outsiders. For a human to name it showed a depth of cultural knowledge that bordered on the impossible. "You know our ways better than expected," Pyraxis acknowledged. "But knowledge and courage in the face of annihilation are different things. Will you stand and face the sacred flames knowing that each one could reduce you to ash?" Marcus felt fear coursing through his veins, but he also felt something else. The growing realization that this wasn't really about combat at all. This was about trust. The dragons needed to know that humans could be trusted to stand firm in the face of overwhelming power, to maintain their integrity even when faced with forces beyond their comprehension. "I will stand," Marcus replied. "But I ask one thing in return. Allow me to respond to each flame with our own human tradition, the words we speak when facing the impossible." Pyraxis considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Granted. Begin when ready, Ancient Lord." The first flame came as a narrow jet of white-hot fire that passed so close to Marcus, he could feel his armor's outer layer beginning to char. But he held his position and spoke clearly. "We stand not because we are fearless, but because some things matter more than fear." The second flame was broader, forcing Marcus to remain steady as waves of heat washed over him. "We endure not because we are strong, but because strength comes from enduring." By the fourth flame, Marcus's armor was smoking and his vision was blurring from the heat, but he continued to stand and speak. The watching dragons had fallen completely silent, transfixed by this small being who faced their most powerful lord without flinching. The 7th and final flame was the most terrible, a torrent of fire that would have melted tungsten. Marcus felt his armor's systems failing, felt the heat beginning to penetrate to his skin, but he remained upright and spoke his final words. "We stand together not because we must, but because together we are more than the sum of our parts." When the flames finally died away, Marcus was still standing, though barely. His armor was blackened and sparking, and he could smell his own singed hair. But he had not moved, had not shown fear, and had answered each demonstration of power with an affirmation of human values. Lord Pyraxis stared down at him with something approaching awe. "Remarkable. You faced the sacred flames and spoke of unity rather than survival. Either you are the bravest fool I have ever encountered, or you understand something about courage that even we dragons have forgotten." Marcus managed a shaky smile. "Maybe both, my lord. But I meant every word. Humans know we're not the strongest or fastest or most powerful species in the galaxy. What we are is persistent, and we learn, and we believe that working together makes everyone stronger." The ancient dragon was quiet for a long moment, his massive form radiating contemplation. Around the amphitheater, other dragons began to murmur among themselves, their voices carrying notes of confusion and growing respect. This was not how these challenges usually proceeded. "You have not yet conquered me, human," Pyraxis said finally. "The challenge requires that one of us yield to the other. I have shown you fire. What do you offer in return?" This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for, the culmination of everything he had learned about dragon psychology and culture. He deactivated his armor's defensive systems and took a step forward, moving closer to the massive dragon despite every survival instinct screaming at him to flee. "I offer you something no one has given you in 1,000 years, Lord Pyraxis. I offer you the chance to be wrong." The words hit the amphitheater like a physical blow. Dragons around the arena recoiled in shock. To suggest that their most ancient lord could be wrong about anything was beyond insulting. It was incomprehensible. But Marcus pressed on, his armor translating his earnest passion into waves of golden light. "You believe that cooperation with humans diminishes dragonkind. You believe that maintaining superiority requires isolation. You believe that the old ways are the only ways that preserve your honor." Pyraxis's eyes blazed with fury, but Marcus didn't stop. "I offer you the possibility that you might be wrong about all of it. That true strength might come from lifting others up rather than keeping them down. That honor might be found in teaching rather than dominating. That the greatest dragons in history might be those who help other species reach their own potential." The ancient dragon reared back as if struck. "You dare suggest that I suggest that you're wise enough to consider new possibilities," Marcus interrupted. "I suggest that a dragon who has lived for millennia might be curious about what could happen if the galaxy's greatest species worked together instead of apart." I suggest that Lord Paraxis the Red might be remembered not just as a master of flame, but as the dragon who helped forge a new age of cooperation. The amphitheater fell into absolute silence. Marcus stood before the towering dragon, small and fragile but radiating absolute conviction. His armor glowed with patterns of hope and determination that spoke directly to draconic emotional centers. Finally, incredibly, Lord Paraxis began to laugh. The sound was like controlled volcanic eruptions, deep and rumbling and filled with genuine amusement. You impossible little creature. You didn't come here to conquer me through force or fear. You came to conquer me through hope. Is it working? Marcus asked with a grin. Lord Paraxis's laughter echoed across the volcanic amphitheater, a sound that none of the assembled dragons had heard in centuries. The ancient red dragon lowered his massive head until he was eye level with Marcus again, and when he spoke, his voice carried undertones of something unprecedented, genuine curiosity mixed with dawning respect. You ask if it is working, little conqueror. The answer is more complex than you might expect. Paraxis paused, his golden eyes studying Marcus with new intensity. In all my millennia, no being has ever offered me the opportunity to be wrong. The very concept is intriguing. Around the amphitheater, the watching dragons shifted restlessly. This was not how ancient challenges were supposed to proceed. There should have been fire and fury, demonstration of power and submission to strength. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented. A philosophical debate between species that had never seen each other as intellectual equals. Tell me, human, Paraxis continued, what makes you believe that cooperation could benefit dragonkind? We have existed for eons without needing aid from lesser species. Marcus felt his armor cooling as the immediate threat of incineration passed, but he knew the real test was just beginning. Because isolation is a luxury you can no longer afford, my lord. The universe has become too dangerous, too complex for any single species to navigate alone. He gestured toward the star-filled sky visible through the amphitheater's open roof. The start of ours were just the beginning. Our combined intelligence networks have detected other threats moving in the dark between galaxies. Machine consciousnesses that see all organic life as irrelevant. Energy beings that consume entire star systems. Ancient entities awakening from billion-year slumbers. Paraxis's expression grew more serious. You speak of intelligence networks. What manner of cooperation produces such knowledge? The kind King Vorthak envisions, Marcus replied. Shared databases, coordinated exploration fleets, combined research efforts. When a human scout ship encounters something strange, that information is immediately available to Altarian analysts, crystalline philosophers, and yes, dragon scholars. When a dragon discovers a new magical principle, human engineers can help develop technological applications. Lady Crystalwing, who had been watching from a high perch, descended to the arena floor. Her silver scales rippled with patterns of skepticism. You describe a fantasy, human. Dragons do not share our knowledge with inferior species. Marcus turned to face her, his armor adjusting to include her in the conversation's emotional resonance. With respect, Lady Crystalwing, that attitude is exactly what nearly led to disaster during the start of our invasion. Dragons initially tried to fight alone, believing your magic and individual power would be sufficient. How many dragon strongholds fell before you accepted that cooperation was necessary? The silver dragon recoiled as if slapped. The loss of ancient dragon citadels during the early phases of the war remained a source of deep shame. But before she could respond angrily, Lord Paraxis intervened. The human speaks painful truth, Crystalwing. Our pride did cost lives. The ancient dragon's voice carried undertones of old regret. But acknowledging past mistakes does not necessarily mean embracing radical change, doesn't it? Marcus challenged. Lord Paraxis, you've lived long enough to witness the rise and fall of countless civilizations. You've seen what happens when societies become too rigid, too convinced of their own superiority. They stagnate. They decline. They eventually fall to more adaptable competitors. Marcus activated his armor's holographic projectors, filling the air above the arena with images from human historical databases. These are the hegemony of brass, the crystal dominions, the infinite empire, all species that once believed themselves inherently superior to all others, all now extinct or reduced to shadows of their former glory. The images showed the ruins of once great civilizations, the skeletal remains of vast cities, the faded monuments to powers that had seemed eternal. Dragons studied the holographs with growing unease, recognizing patterns that struck uncomfortably close to home. "You suggest that we risk extinction through isolation," Paraxis said slowly. "Yet cooperation with lesser beings also carries risks. What if we diminish ourselves by associating with those beneath our station?" Marcus smiled, and his armor translated the expression into patterns of confident warmth. "What if the opposite happens? What if interaction with other species makes dragons stronger, not weaker?" He gestured toward the assembled crowd. "Every dragon here is incredibly powerful individually, but imagine what you could accomplish collectively. Human creativity combined with dragon wisdom. Altarian precision merged with dragon intuition. Crystalline patience enhanced by dragon passion." "You speak in generalities," Lady Stormwing called from her perch. "Give us specific examples of how this cooperation would benefit dragonkind." Marcus had been hoping for this question. "Medical advancement. Dragons live for millennia, but you still suffer from certain genetic disorders that limit your magical potential. Human medical research combined with Altarian bioengineering could potentially eliminate those limitations entirely." A ripple of interest went through the crowd. Dragon genetic diseases were rarely discussed, but they were a persistent problem that had resisted all traditional solutions. "Technological enhancement," Marcus continued. "Dragons rely primarily on natural magic, but imagine spellcraft enhanced by quantum computing, flame breath amplified by plasma containment fields, flight capabilities augmented by gravity manipulation. Defensive applications," he pressed on, building momentum. "The Star Devourers adapted to individual dragon combat techniques because each dragon fought alone. But coordinated tactics, combined arms approaches, integrated defense networks, these concepts could make dragonkind virtually invincible." Lord Shadowscale, Master of the Dark Nebulae, spoke for the first time. "You paint an attractive picture, human. But cooperation requires trust, and trust must be earned. How do we know that humans will not eventually turn on us once they have learned our secrets?" Marcus had expected this question as well. "Because we need you as much as you need us, Lord Shadowscale. Humans are good at many things, but we lack the deep wisdom that comes from experiencing centuries of existence. We lack the magical abilities that are innate to dragonkind. We lack the perspective that comes from watching civilizations rise and fall." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "But more than that, we share common values that matter more than species differences. We both value courage, honor, the protection of those we care about. We both believe in the importance of knowledge and growth. We both understand that some things are worth fighting for, even against impossible odds." Paraxis had been listening intently, his massive form radiating deep thought. "You speak well, human. But words are not conquest. The challenge remains incomplete until one of us yields to the other." Marcus nodded, understanding that they had reached the crucial moment. Everything he had said, all the logic and passion and hope he had shared, would mean nothing if he couldn't find a way to bridge the final gap between human and dragon understanding. "Then I propose a different kind of yielding," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the amphitheater with crystalline clarity. "Instead of one conquering the other, what if we both yield to something greater than ourselves?" "Explain," Paraxis commanded. Marcus spread his arms wide, encompassing the entire gathered assembly. "What if we yield to the possibility of a future where dragonkind and humanity stand together as equals? Where the wisdom of ages combines with the innovation of youth, where the strength of tradition merges with the flexibility of adaptation?" The human stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the ancient dragon until he was standing directly beneath Paraxis's massive head. "I yield my species' assumption that we must always prove ourselves through conflict. Do you yield your species' assumption that cooperation diminishes your greatness?" The moment stretched like molten glass, fragile and transformative. Lord Paraxis stared down at the small human who had somehow turned an ancient challenge into something entirely new. Around the amphitheater, thousands of dragons held their breath, waiting to see how their eldest lord would respond to this unprecedented proposition. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Success would open doors between species that had remained closed for millennia. Failure would likely mean not just his death, but the collapse of King Vorthak's progressive vision and a return to the dangerous isolation that had nearly doomed them all during the Star Devourer War. Finally, incredibly, Lord Paraxis began to lower his massive head. The gesture was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it gradually became unmistakable. The ancient dragon was bowing to the human standing before him. "I yield," Paraxis said, his voice carrying across the amphitheater like rolling thunder. "Not to your strength, for you have little. Not to your magic, for you have none. I yield to your vision of what we might become together." The reaction from the assembled dragons was explosive. Roars of shock and outrage echoed across the volcanic landscape, as some of the most conservative lords expressed their fury at this turn of events. But there were other voices too, younger dragons, progressives who had been silenced by tradition, even some ancient ones who had grown weary of eternal isolation. Lady Crystalwing landed heavily beside the arena floor, her silver scales dark with anger. "This is madness. You cannot yield to a mammal, Paraxis. The very concept violates everything we are." But Lord Paraxis raised his massive head and fixed her with eyes that blazed with new purpose. "Everything we were, perhaps, but not everything we could become." He turned to address the entire assembly, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "This human has shown me something I had forgotten in my millennia of existence: the courage to change." Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle with relief, but he forced himself to remain standing. The challenge was won, but the real work was just beginning. He had to help these proud ancient beings understand that cooperation didn't mean submission. "Lords and ladies of dragonkind," Marcus called out, his armor projecting his voice and emotional resonance to reach every member of the assembly. "Lord Paraxis's wisdom shows the path forward. This is not about humans conquering dragons or dragons diminishing themselves. This is about all of us rising together to meet the challenges that await us." King Vorthak materialized in the arena, having teleported from his observation point in the royal pavilion. His humanoid form radiated satisfaction and hope as he approached the human who had just accomplished the impossible. "Captain Chen has proven that courage, and wisdom can indeed conquer even the fiercest opposition," Vorthak announced. "But more than that, he has shown us a new way forward. Lord Paraxis, will you join me in designing this future cooperation?" The ancient red dragon considered for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I will, but I have conditions. Cooperation must be genuine partnership, not disguised subordination. Dragons will maintain our sovereignty and our dignity, and humans must prove themselves worthy of trust through actions, not just words." "Agreed," Marcus said immediately. "We propose starting small. Cultural exchanges, joint scientific missions, shared defense protocols for border systems. Let trust build naturally through positive experiences." Lady Stormwing descended from her perch, electricity crackling around her blue scales. "And what of dragons who refuse to participate in this grand experiment? Are we to be forced into cooperation?" King Vorthak stepped forward. "No one will be forced. Dragons who prefer isolation may maintain it, but neither will isolationists be permitted to sabotage cooperation efforts. The choice will be individual, but the consequences will be real." Over the following hours, as the assembled dragons debated the implications of what had just occurred, Marcus found himself surrounded by creatures he had only ever seen as distant, terrifying beings. Up close, he began to understand that dragons were individuals with distinct personalities. Fears, hopes, and dreams, just like any other sentient species. Lady Moonshadow approached him during a break in the formal proceedings. "You have accomplished something remarkable, Captain Chen. But I must ask, are you truly prepared for what comes next? Dragons are not easy allies. We are proud, stubborn, and set in our ways." Marcus smiled tiredly. "Humans aren't exactly low-maintenance partners either. We're impulsive, short-sighted, and we have a tendency to argue about everything. But we're also loyal, creative, and we never give up. Maybe our flaws will balance each other out." As the debate continued around them, Marcus noticed something encouraging. Dragons who had initially spoken against cooperation were beginning to ask practical questions about implementation. The tone was shifting from outright rejection to cautious curiosity. Lord Shadowscale approached the arena floor, his dark scales absorbing light like a living void. "Human, you spoke of threats moving in the darkness between galaxies. What specific intelligence do your people possess?" Marcus activated his armor's data systems, projecting holographic displays of the information gathered by the combined intelligence networks. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures moving through intergalactic space. Analysis suggests artificial constructs of enormous scale, possibly continent-sized ships or even mobile planets. The data caused a stir among the dragons. They had faced the Star Devourers, but these new signatures suggested threats of even greater magnitude. Additionally, Marcus continued, we've identified what appear to be ancient automated systems awakening throughout the galaxy. Defensive networks left behind by extinct civilizations, triggered by unknown criteria. Some are benign, but others are actively hostile to any form of life. Lord Pyraxis studied the projections with growing concern. These threats are indeed beyond the capability of any single species to handle. The Star Devourers nearly overwhelmed us even with cooperation. These new dangers require unprecedented unity, King Vorthak finished, which is why Captain Chen's success today is so crucial. We need to move beyond grudging temporary alliances to genuine long-term partnership. As the formal assembly began to wind down, Marcus found himself feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had somehow managed to turn a potentially lethal challenge into a diplomatic breakthrough. But he also understood that this was just the beginning. The real work of building trust and cooperation would take years, possibly decades. Lady Crystalwing approached him one final time, her silver scales now showing patterns of grudging respect. You have won this day, human, but words are easily spoken. Can your species maintain this cooperation when the costs become real? When human lives are lost protecting dragon interests, or when dragon resources are spent defending human colonies? Marcus met her gaze steadily. I don't know, Lady Crystalwing, I hope so. But I do know that we'll never find out if we don't try, and I believe that both our species are capable of more than we've ever demanded of ourselves. As the dragons began to disperse, returning to their various domains to consider what they had witnessed, Marcus realized that he had not just conquered a dragon today. He had helped plant the seeds of a new age, one where the ancient divisions between species might finally begin to heal. The real test would come in the days and years ahead, as words became actions and theories became reality. But for now, standing in the shadow of Lord Pyraxis with King Vorthak beside him, Marcus allowed himself to feel hope for the future of the galaxy. 3 years had passed since the challenge on Pyraxis Prime, and the galaxy was transforming in ways no one could have predicted. Captain Marcus Chen, now Admiral Chen of the newly formed Interspecies Defense Coalition, stood on the bridge of the IDS Harmony, watching as human and dragon crews worked side by side to calibrate the ship's hybrid weapon systems. The Harmony itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining human technological innovation with dragon biomagical enhancement and the precision manufacturing capabilities of the Altarians. Its living hull could regenerate from battle damage while its quantum processors calculated firing solutions with supernatural accuracy. The ship represented everything Marcus had hoped for when he first stood before Lord Pyraxis. Admiral, called Commander Sarah Kim, his human tactical officer, were receiving priority transmissions from the Outer Rim. It looks like the deep space monitoring stations have detected something significant. Marcus turned toward the main display as data streams flowed across the holographic interface. What he saw made his blood run cold. The massive energy signatures they had been tracking for years were finally moving with purpose, heading directly toward inhabited systems. Get me King Vorthak and Lord Pyraxis, Marcus ordered. Emergency priority. Within minutes, the holographic forms of both dragons materialized on the bridge. Vorthak appeared in his humanoid form, while Pyraxis had chosen to manifest as a scaled-down version of his true dragon shape, still imposing but small enough to fit in the command center. The time has come, Vorthak said grimly as he reviewed the incoming data. The Void Harbingers are making their move. That was the name the combined intelligence networks had given to the massive constructs approaching from intergalactic space. Unlike the Star Devourers, which had been interested in consuming physical matter, these entities seemed focused on something far more disturbing, the systematic elimination of consciousness itself. Lord Pyraxis studied the tactical displays with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Their formation suggests coordination on a scale we can barely comprehend. If our estimates are correct, each of those constructs is larger than most moons. How long until they reach the outer colonies? Marcus asked. 18 days, Commander Kim replied. At current velocity, they'll make contact with the Kepler frontier within 3 weeks. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The Kepler frontier represented one of the most successful examples of interspecies cooperation. With human colonies, dragon enclaves, and Altarian research stations sharing resources and knowledge in perfect harmony. If the Void Harbingers reached it, millions of lives would be lost. What's the status of the combined fleet? Marcus inquired. 237 vessels of various classes, Vorthak reported. 62 human ships, 41 dragon dreadnoughts, 78 Altarian precision craft, and 56 vessels from the other allied species. It's the largest cooperative military force in galactic history. Will it be enough? Pyraxis's laugh was like controlled thunder. Against enemies this large and unknown, unlikely. But we have advantages the Harbingers cannot anticipate. They expect to face fragmented competing species. Instead, they will encounter unity forged through trust and mutual respect. Over the following days, as the combined fleet assembled at rally points throughout the frontier sectors, Marcus witnessed the fulfillment of everything he had dreamed of during that challenge 3 years ago. Human engineers worked alongside dragon artificers to upgrade weapon systems. Altarian navigators collaborated with dragon seers to plot optimal battle formations. The barriers between species that had once seemed insurmountable had dissolved into efficient cooperation. The first engagement came at the Proxima Beacon, an early warning station positioned at the galaxy's edge. The human crew, augmented by dragon magical support and Altarian tactical analysis, managed to hold off the Harbinger scouts long enough to gather crucial intelligence about enemy capabilities. What they learned was sobering. The Void Harbingers weren't just machines. They were something far worse. Consciousness-eating entities that could drain the life force from entire populations, leaving behind empty husks that moved without thought or purpose. They're not trying to conquer territory, Marcus realized as he studied the battle reports. They're trying to harvest minds. Every thinking being in the galaxy is potential prey. Lord Pyraxis, now serving as tactical advisor to the fleet, nodded grimly, which means conventional defensive strategies are useless. We cannot simply hold territory. We must eliminate the threat entirely, or eventually succumb to it. The main battle began at the Harmony Nebula, where the combined fleet took its stand against the Harbinger vanguard. Marcus watched from the bridge of his flagship as dragons danced through space alongside human fighters, their natural agility enhanced by technological upgrades that would have been impossible without cooperation between species. The battle was unlike anything in recorded history. Dragonfire enhanced by human plasma technology, carved through Harbinger constructs that shrugged off conventional weapons. Human ships protected by dragon defensive magic and guided by Altarian precision performed maneuvers that defied traditional physics. But the enemy adapted quickly. For every tactical innovation the Alliance developed, the Harbingers found a counter. The battle stretched on for hours, then days, with neither side able to gain decisive advantage. It was Lady Crystalwing who provided the breakthrough. The Silver Dragon, now one of Marcus's closest allies despite their rocky beginning, had been studying the Harbingers' consciousness-draining techniques. She approached Marcus with a theory that sounded impossible. Their power comes from stolen minds, she explained. But consciousness is not just information, it's connection. Every sapient being they've consumed remains linked to the Harbinger network. If we could reverse that connection, we could turn their own power against them, Marcus finished, understanding immediately. But how? Voluntary sacrifice, Lord Pyraxis said quietly. A willing consciousness freely given might be able to carry a virus through the network. Something designed to restore individual identity to the absorbed minds. The implications were staggering. Someone would have to allow themselves to be consumed by the Harbingers, carrying with them a consciousness virus designed by the Alliance's best minds. It was a suicide mission with galaxy-wide implications. I'll do it, Marcus said without hesitation. No, Vorthak replied firmly. The human who conquered dragons through understanding must survive to help build what comes after. I will carry the virus. For the next several hours, the Alliance's greatest minds worked together to design something that had never existed before. A weapon made of pure consciousness, capable of spreading through the Harbinger network and restoring individual identity to billions of absorbed minds. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. King Vorthak would approach the largest Harbinger construct under a flag of parley, carrying the consciousness virus in his mind. When the entity attempted to drain his thoughts, it would instead receive a gift that would spread throughout their entire network. As Vorthak prepared for his final mission, Lord Pyraxis approached Marcus on the bridge. The young king was right about cooperation making us stronger. I have lived for millennia, but I have learned more about courage and wisdom in these past 3 years than in all the centuries before. The galaxy will remember both of you, Marcus replied. This victory belongs to all our species together. Vorthak's final transmission came as his ship approached the massive Harbinger construct. Tell the galaxy that dragons and humans learned to stand together. Tell them that cooperation conquered fear, and that the future belongs to all who choose unity over division. The consciousness virus spread through the Harbinger network like wildfire. Across space, the massive constructs began to shudder and convulse as billions of absorbed minds suddenly remembered who they were. The Void Harbingers, dependent on stolen consciousness for their power, collapsed as their victims reclaimed their identities and turned against their captors. In the aftermath, as the combined fleet surveyed the wreckage of their ancient enemy, Marcus reflected on how far they had all come. 3 years ago, the idea of dragons and humans working together had been almost unthinkable. Now their cooperation had literally saved the galaxy. Lord Pyraxis landed on the Harmony's flight deck in his full dragon form, his ancient eyes bright with satisfaction. "It is done," he rumbled. "The galaxy is free, and the bonds between our species have been forged in the fires of shared victory." Marcus nodded, already thinking about the future they would build together. There would be new challenges, new threats, new opportunities for growth and cooperation, but whatever came next, they would face it together. Dragons and humans and all the species of the galaxy, united by trust, respect, and the understanding that they were stronger together than apart. The age of isolation was over. The age of cooperation had begun,